Melissa leaned back slightly, letting out a quiet breath before continuing, her voice steady and deliberate. What was decisive, she said, was the mansion. Ellen and Robert exchanged confused glances. Melissa reached for the next folder, a beige file marked Property Records. Inside was a copy of the building inspection report. This, she said, sliding the papers across the table, is the foundation of everything, literally. Robert adjusted his glasses and began scanning the report. His eyes widened as he read the detailed notes. Cracks in the foundation, insufficient concrete strength, defective waterproofing. Attached were photographs showing fissures along the basement walls. They discovered corner cutting in the construction. Melissa continued, the repairs will cost at least $1 million, and that's just the beginning. The mortgage payments have been in arrears for over a year. The overdue amount already exceeds $150,000. And property taxes? Unpaid for 2 years, another $50,000. Her tone was calm, but her words struck like hammer blows. I've been hiding the bank's collection notices in the study drawer. Every day James pretended not to notice. Outside, the early summer sunlight bathed the garden in gold. The hydrangeas glowed in soft hues of blue and violet, their peaceful beauty a painful contrast to the chaos being revealed inside the house. Melissa picked up another folder, this one black, labeled Industry Reports. Similar problems have been discovered in other projects under Brown Development, she said. The luxury apartment complex, the Grand, and the office building Parkview Tower, both have major defects. Insufficient foundation strength, defective waterproofing, shoddy plumbing. Complaints are piling up. The company's reputation has plummeted. Subcontractors are preparing lawsuits for unpaid construction fees. And now, the banks are preparing to cut off all financing. Robert's voice trembled. At this rate, the company will collapse. Melissa nodded. It already has, they just don't know it yet. But that's part of the plan. Her parents froze. They had never seen their daughter speak with such calm precision, her face illuminated by the confidence of someone who had prepared for every outcome. This isn't about revenge, she said softly. It's about justice and survival. She opened another document, a property deed for a luxury co-op in Manhattan. 3 months ago, when I realized what was happening, I began taking action. I've already purchased this apartment under my name, a pre-war building on the Upper East Side. I transferred all my assets to separate accounts, including Switzerland and the Cayman Islands. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement, none of James's debts can touch me. Ellen gasped. Melissa, you thought of everything. Her daughter smiled faintly. I had to. I'm not just protecting myself, I'm protecting this child. She touched her belly gently. Then, she reached for one final folder, marked in crimson. This, she said quietly, is my last card. Inside were 5 years' worth of off-the-books ledgers, photos of hidden transactions, records of tax evasion, and evidence of fraudulent real estate sales. These documents prove James's company has been committing large-scale fraud. Once I release them to the authorities, Brown Development will be finished. Ellen was speechless. Robert could only mutter, my God, Melissa? Melissa closed the folders neatly and looked up, her expression serene. They think they've won, living in that mansion, laughing at me, but they have no idea that the house itself is a ticking time bomb. When the foundation fails, when the bank forecloses, and when the city issues its safety violations, they'll understand what they've built their lives upon. She stood, walking to the window. The sunlight glimmered on her necklace, the same pearls her mother had once worn at her wedding. This isn't vengeance, Mom, she said softly, it's closure. 3 months later, in early October, the wind sweeping through Manhattan carried the first hint of autumn. Melissa, now a mother, stood in her penthouse apartment overlooking Central Park. Her 2-month-old daughter, Emma, slept peacefully in the crib nearby. Madam, your morning paper, said Johnson, her family's butler, handing her the New York Times. Across the front page, bold headlines screamed, Real estate tycoon James Brown's massive fraud exposed. Brown Development in crisis, bankruptcy imminent. Melissa's calm eyes scanned the article, then drifted to her smartphone, which buzzed on the table. A message from Caroline flashed on the screen. Help, the bank is foreclosing. The house is falling apart. What should I do, Melissa? Please, help? There was no reply. Melissa turned instead to her desk, where legal documents were neatly stacked beside a retainer agreement from a top Manhattan law firm. Every step of her plan had unfolded exactly as predicted. The mansion's foundation had cracked beyond repair. Water leaks, black mold, and structural tilting had rendered the property unsafe for habitation. The city had issued an immediate evacuation order. Repair costs had soared to $1.5 million. At the same time, the bank foreclosed on the property after unpaid mortgage balances surpassed its assessed value. Brown Development had filed for bankruptcy protection. Multiple lawsuits from subcontractors and banks flooded in. James Brown's name became synonymous with corporate fraud. And now, the court day had come. In the marble courtroom of the Manhattan District Court, Melissa and her estranged husband finally faced each other. The once proud real estate tycoon now looked gaunt and defeated, his designer suit ill-fitting and his eyes hollow. Melissa, on the other hand, stood radiant and composed, her posture graceful, her voice steady. "So you knew everything?" James asked, voice trembling. "Yes," she said, "I knew about the fraud, the unpaid taxes, the hidden accounts. I even knew about you and my sister. I could have stopped you earlier. But," she smiled faintly, "I'm grateful." "Grateful?" he repeated bitterly. "Yes," she said softly, "because you gave me a reason to start over, for me and my daughter." The verdict was swift and merciless. James Brown was sentenced to 8 years in prison for financial fraud and tax evasion. All company assets were seized. Caroline, having claimed ownership of the mansion, was forced to pay its crushing repair and tax debts, a burden that drove her into bankruptcy. That night, Caroline sent one final message. "Melissa, please let me come home. I have nothing left." Ellen's reply, short and firm, arrived minutes later. Choices have consequences. Months passed. One bright spring morning, sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Melissa's Upper East Side apartment. She stood in her home office, reviewing documents under the letterhead Melissa Wilson Associates. She had reclaimed her maiden name and her independence. Her daughter cooed softly in the crib nearby. "Emma, it's time to wake up," she said gently. Moments later, the doorbell rang. Johnson announced, "Mr. David Grant is here." David, a real estate appraiser in his early 40s, entered with a warm smile. Their professional collaboration had slowly blossomed into something deeper. "Good morning, Melissa," he said, placing a folder on her desk. "I've reviewed the Brooklyn property, it's a solid investment." They shared coffee, laughter, and quiet moments as Emma played nearby. In that tranquil morning light, Melissa finally felt what true peace meant, not luxury, not status, but freedom earned through strength and resilience. Outside, cherry blossoms drifted past the window like pink snowflakes. Melissa whispered softly, holding her daughter close, "So this is what happiness feels like." And for the first time in years, she truly believed it. The evidence was undeniable, but what truly sealed the case wasn't in the numbers or financial statements. It was in the very foundation of their mansion. Melissa carefully unfolded the next document, a building inspection report that looked almost too heavy for her trembling hands. The detailed notes and photographs inside painted a grim picture: severe structural issues, cracks snaking through the foundation, water damage creeping into the basement walls. She took a deep breath before speaking. "The foundation is already compromised," she said quietly. "They cut corners everywhere, weak concrete, insufficient steel reinforcement, no proper waterproofing. The entire structure's integrity is failing." Her voice trembled, but her eyes remained steady. "Repairs will cost at least $1 million, she continued, flipping to the final page, "and that's just the beginning of the disaster." The air in the room seemed to thicken. Her parents sat frozen, their hands clasped tightly as if afraid to interrupt her. Melissa looked up and spoke again, her tone sharper now. "The mortgage has been in arrears for over a year. The overdue balance is already $150,000, and the unpaid property taxes? Another $50,000. I've been hiding the bank's letters from him, every notice, every warning. He'd pretend not to see them." The early summer sunlight filtered through the lace curtains, filling the living room with a deceptive warmth. Outside, The hydrangeas bloomed in shades of blue and violet, serene and delicate. Inside, the truth unfolding was anything but. Melissa turned the page again. And it's not just our house, she said. Other Brown development properties have the same issues: the luxury complex, the Grand, the office tower, Parkview, foundation defects, poor plumbing, water infiltration. People are starting to talk. Complaints are piling up. She reached for a folder filled with neatly cut newspaper clippings, small articles from trade papers and whispers from industry insiders. The company's reputation is collapsing. Subcontractors are demanding payment. Lawsuits are being drafted. The banks are hesitating. The entire empire is crumbling. Her mother, Ellen, pressed a hand to her chest. Melissa, this is so much worse than we imagined. Melissa met her mother's eyes. Yes, but I've already prepared for this. She pulled out another set of documents, these ones pristine, organized, and stamped with official seals. A Manhattan co-op. Pre-war architecture. Upper East Side. 3 bedrooms. Purchased under my name. Fully paid. Ellen gasped. You bought a new home? Melissa nodded calmly. And I moved all my assets long ago. Separate accounts. Swiss and Cayman deposits. Thanks to the prenuptial agreement. His debts can't touch me. I've even retained legal counsel. She laid down the final folder, embossed with the name of one of New York's top law firms. They've verified every document, every transaction, every lie. The divorce is ready. The evidence is airtight. Her father, Robert, sat back in silence, his eyes a mix of pride and disbelief. You've thought of everything. Melissa's lips curved in a faint smile. I had to. He and Caroline thought they could destroy me, but they never realized I was quietly rebuilding everything they tried to take. Ellen reached across the table, tears shining in her eyes. Why didn't you tell us, honey? If I had, Melissa replied softly, you would have worried. Besides, they needed to fall on their own. Their arrogance was the perfect trap. Robert exhaled slowly, looking at his daughter with deep respect. You've grown stronger than any of us ever imagined. Strength isn't born from comfort, Dad, she said. It's forged in betrayal. Then, with calm precision, she revealed her final folder, her most devastating weapon. 5 years of falsified ledgers, shell company transfers, photographs of fake invoices, and hidden tax evasion records. Everything meticulously documented, everything traceable to her husband. Her parents stared in disbelief. My husband and Caroline chose to live in that mansion, Melissa said evenly, but soon, it'll become their burden. The debt, the repair costs, the taxes, they'll drown under the weight of their own greed. The sunlight shifted, bathing her in gold. The determination in her eyes was sharp, unflinching. Inside her, the life growing in her womb seemed to stir, a silent acknowledgement of the promise she was making. For this child's sake, she whispered, I'll see this through to the end. Ellen's tears finally fell, but they were no longer of grief, they were of pride. Months later, the reckoning. Autumn arrived in Manhattan, crisp and golden. From her high-rise apartment overlooking Central Park, Melissa stood by the window, her infant daughter cradled in her arms. The city's hum drifted faintly upward, carrying with it the smell of roasted chestnuts and the faint rustle of falling leaves. Madam, your morning paper, said Johnson, the butler, handing her the Times. Across the front page, bold headlines screamed, Real estate tycoon James Brown arrested for massive fraud. Brown development collapses under scandal. Melissa skimmed the article, then set it aside. Everything was unfolding just as she predicted. Her phone buzzed. Caroline's name appeared on the screen. Help, the bank is foreclosing. What do I do? Melissa didn't reply. Instead, she turned back to her desk, where a neatly stacked folder contained updated reports. The mansion's foundation now severely compromised, mold spreading through the HVAC, repair estimates exceeding $1.5 million. City inspectors had declared it uninhabitable. The bank had already seized the property. Within days, Brown Development's collapse became the talk of Wall Street. Contractors filed lawsuits, employees fled, investors demanded explanations that James could no longer give. And then came the courtroom. The trial. The courtroom was cold, the marble echoing with every footstep. Across the aisle sat James Brown, once a confident magnate, now hollow-eyed and defeated. Melissa, poised in an elegant black suit, stood at the witness stand. "You knew about the fraud?" the attorney asked. "Yes," she said clearly, "and I gathered the evidence myself." James raised his head, disbelief flashing across his face. "You knew everything?" "I did," Melissa replied. Then, softly, "and I'm thankful. Because your lies gave me something better, a new beginning for me and my daughter." The verdict was swift. James was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison. His assets were liquidated. His company dissolved. Caroline's bankruptcy followed soon after. The mansion, once their symbol of power, was sold at auction to pay off mounting debts. A new life. Months later, spring returned. Melissa's new accounting firm, Melissa Wilson Associates, was officially registered. The office, filled with warm light and the scent of fresh coffee, overlooked the city that had once been her battlefield. Her butler appeared at the door. "Mr. David Grant is here, ma'am." David entered, smiling gently. "Good morning, Melissa. I brought the appraisal for that Brooklyn property you mentioned." She smiled back, a faint blush rising in her cheeks. "Thank you. Let's go over it." As they discussed figures over coffee, her daughter Emma gurgled happily on the carpet, clutching a stuffed bunny. The atmosphere was peaceful, domestic in a way Melissa had never known. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from Caroline. "Please, let me come home. I have nothing left." Melissa didn't respond immediately. Instead, she looked at her daughter, then at the skyline beyond the window. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft but firm. "Choices have consequences." Later that evening, she stood by the window as the last light of day faded over Central Park. Emma cooed in her arms, watching the city lights flicker alive. "Hey, baby," Melissa whispered, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. "This is our world now." Outside, cherry blossoms drifted through the spring air, settling on the streets below, delicate symbols of renewal. This was no longer a tale of revenge. It was a story of rebirth, of strength reclaimed and justice served. Melissa smiled faintly as she turned away from the window. Everything had happened exactly according to plan. And this time, the plan was hers alone.